Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a very special chat here on Hangfire. Today, I am super thrilled to be talking to my guest today. He is a contributing editor at Rolling Stone magazine, a Grammy winner, currently teaches creative writing at the University of Pennsylvania, and has interviewed many of our favorite artists over the years. Just this week, the new Steve Miller box set, J50, The Evolution of the Joker, was released, celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Joker, containing new liner notes written by Anthony and Steve Miller. So it is with great pleasure that I welcome Anthony DeCurtis today. Anthony, hello.
Oh, Justin, thank you for that kind introduction, and such a pleasure to be here.
Oh my God, it's absolutely my pleasure. I'm absolutely honored that you took some time to speak with me. And, whenever I hear that you're currently teaching, it makes me very jealous of your students because I would love to be in that class. And I think I'd be in your office hours all the time.
I'm doing a Stones class in the spring. So if you're around Philadelphia, man, come on by.
Oh my God, I might have to take you up on that offer. Are you kidding me? I would do extra homework in that class, extra credit constantly.
We had some fun. I did it once before. It was the semester that the pandemic dropped. So in the middle of it, we had to go to Zoom and, from our it's a seminar sized group. And, so our intimate meetings became Zoom meetings. But man, I have to say that group had an incredible kind of intensity. And I was very struck by the level of interest in the Stones. You never can tell these days, but boy, I mean, these students were into it and it was inspiring and so much fun. Very exciting. So I had a great time.
That sounds fantastic because I've heard of universities offering classes on Dylan, for example, and when you hear about that, you go, oh well, that makes sense, sure, but you think, oh, the day someone comes up with a Stones one, that'll be great, and I'm so glad you did it.
Well, it was sort of funny, because the Stones always, and Jagger in particular, always plays down. Jagger turned down an offer. Here we are getting into the weeds, of course. But like,
I'm ready.
When oh God, that guy who was their financial advisor, wrote his book. Which did you read that? I forget
No.
what his name is, but it's like he has some ridiculous like Baron such and such or
Right.
whatever.
As Mick would be hanging out with. Those are the kind of people.
Well, he got him, around when that time when, the Stones were, feeling like they were going broke. And, so this guy sort of sorted them out, but he wrote a book, that was really, kind of surprisingly, but, the guy's like actually pretty conservative and, kind of old school Catholic and very traditional, but was sort of also like in some cheeky way, sort of proud of having worked with the Rolling Stones. But, there was stuff in the book that the guy put in, like, he says that, I got Mick an offer to, for a book of his lyrics, that would be, kind of a copy of a book with very handsome artwork and, would show his lyrics. But Mick turned it down because he didn't really think his lyrics were good enough. And he goes, I have to say, I probably agree with him. And like later on, somebody asked Jagger about the book, and Jagger just said, call me old fashioned, but I sort of feel like the guy who handles your finances shouldn't really be writing a book about your personal life. Just my perspective on it, I mean, because one of the things, of course, that's interesting about Jagger himself is that he will never talk about that stuff. you know,
Sure.
but his financial advisor did.
Well, it's almost frustrating. I wonder if it's frustrating for all Stones fans as well that Jagger can be this stubborn, in a way to not want to talk about almost anything. I mean, we recall the famous story that he was offered so much money for a book in the 80s and he returned the money.
With
Because,
Robert Palmer. He was writing it with Robert Palmer.
is that right, Robert? Oh my God, that would have been something.
Yeah. And they turned in a couple of chapters and the publisher said, this isn't what we want. So Jagger gave them the money back because I think the fact that he was using Bob Palmer suggested, Jagger, wanted to write a kind of music book, because I mean, Bob knew so much about, rock and roll and blues and every other kind of music, Moroccan music, certainly. But the publisher was not interested. And I think I don't know that Jagger's ever going to do it.
I know.
By this time, he's 80 years old, is he going to sit down and write a book or find somebody to work on a book with? I don't think he still won't, you know, talk about the kind of stuff that people want to talk about.
Knowing Mick, I think would probably want to go a completely wild direction, not even go the route of a book. And my personal theory is that he may go more of an audio-visual route, because I've seen him over the course of the last 20, 30 years, whenever he's around, he may not do it in all public events, but he'll carry around like this camcorder and record things from his point of view. And I wonder where all that's going.
Well, they did that thing. Was it called Being Mick Jagger?
Yes.
Or Mick? Which was, I think, for those of us who are Stones obsessives, as you are certainly, and it was pretty fascinating. I don't know how fascinating it would be for other people, because once again, although, what was interesting there was Jagger looking at all of the tabloid things about his exploits with Carla Bruni. And, that it was when he was working on Wandering Spirit, which, to my mind I think was he working on Wandering Spirit?
Goddess in the Doorway.
Goddess in the Doorway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think Wandering Spirit is his best solo.
Definitely. Record. Absolutely. Thanks to Rick Rubin, maybe, huh?
Yeah. And there were all these tabloid reports about, what the lyrics were about. And the guy who was, directing the film, Jagger really just looked angry, and he was kind of quiet. And, they had the newspapers were all spread out on, a kind of conference room table. And, you could see Jagger thinking about, what he was going to say to Jerry Hall, and he goes, and Jagger just says, I don't mind the papers. He goes, that's their job. They're doing what their job is. But who gave them the lyrics? There's somebody around here, lyrics, like somebody at the studio, or, maybe somebody working on the film or whoever. But, now they had them, and, he was going to have to answer for them. And it bothered him. And I was struck that he left that in the, in the film.
You're right. Now that you mention it, yeah, it was a very vulnerable, I guess, moment for him. And he can be very controlling about those things. And it's so funny you mentioned Being Mick, because that documentary, in fact, was the lighting of the fuse for me for writing songs and becoming a musician, because I could see Mick's process, and I saw, all you need is a notepad and a little tape recorder. Done. I can do that.
Oh, that's great. I'm quite sure he'd be very pleased to hear that.
Oh, yeah. Perhaps so. Yeah, he would probably smile. And that's,
I think because I think, in some way he does think of himself as a musician, as an artist. And the idea that, you would have looked at something he did and found inspiration in it to do the same thing. I think he would feel that.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I swear, I literally went to Borders Books the next day and bought a very special notebook that was, that was like padded and very nice. And I got to work. And of course, the first songs were crap. But nevertheless, and the other thing that's great about that documentary is the thing I mentioned earlier, is that it was cool to see Mick Jagger look at all these old Rolling Stones session tapes. And the director said, what do you feel when you look at these tapes? And he said, nothing.
Wow. That's amazing. And that's the sort of contrarian part of him, like he's not going to give it to you.
Right.
I'm sure he did feel something, but he wasn't going to share it.
Absolutely correct. Yeah, it's amazing. You got to find your little window, and you don't know when it opens, but you better be ready.
Was very interesting. Here we are talking about Being Mick, which another interesting fact, at least for me, is I've had a hard time finding it. Know that it's around. I mean, I remember when I was teaching my class, I wanted to show it to them because it was, wasn't that long. And I thought, like we should sit around and watch this thing and, see what they make of it. But I couldn't come up with it. I couldn't. Yeah. I mean, I was willing to, whatever. I didn't have to just stream it. I would have bought it, find it, but I didn't see it anywhere.
Yeah, it is out of print. They actually did put out a DVD. I'm not sure how long that run was, but I managed to score a copy at Amoeba Records in LA. It was there. Oh, yeah. like holy crap. I grabbed it. And it is a fascinating watch. I don't know if you remember this one moment where he's at Elton John's party.
Absolutely, with his daughter.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And I love this little moment that the camera's caught where Elton and Mick Jagger are really talking shop about Madonna's show that they saw the day before or something.
Yeah. And also the idea that he brought his daughter along as his date was kind of sweet, you know?
Yes, yes.
It was, and he's kind of a little bit coaching her on what the event is going to be. And, he was enjoying himself. He seemed, very much to be, kind of in a good mood.
Yes, very much so.
Seemed to be now that, this record's done and the Angry single is out. I don't know if you've watched or paid attention to the interviews that the
Mhm.
Stone done and that he's done. And he seems pretty cheery. He's still not, I mean, Jagger's not an easy interview. He's fun. He's fun to write about because he's fun to watch and he's kind of fun to interpret and
Right.
read. But he's not going to bare his soul. I think that seems like a ludicrous idea to him. But he seems to be in a very good mood. Obviously interviewing Keith is entirely different. Keith is there. Like, remember there was a moment the first time I really interviewed him, like where I had really a lot of time. It was
Mhm.
for a Rolling Stone cover.
From 1988?
Yeah.
Oh, I love that one. I was going to mention that.
And I told him, like, at one point we were there, I was drinking, what was I drinking? I was drinking like, oh God, I was drinking Courvoisier or something like that. Some, sort of, fancy cognac. And he was drinking, his some kind of strange concoction of like, whiskey and orange soda or something, just some, like one of these English things where they like these really, really sugary things.
Hmm.
But, I would say we were about, a half hour in and it was going along fine, but I really felt like, I really want to try something here. And often, or at least occasionally, when you're doing interviews, if you say to someone, you show someone something, you tell someone something, and you see if it inspires them, or if it reaches them. And I remember telling Keith, that I saw the Rolling Stones twice in 1965 when I was, 13, and in New York at the Academy of Music and what that was like. And he, you really can tell when artists like that, he was listening very carefully. He was quiet. He was paying attention. And after that, like, I think he felt like there was nowhere that he could go in that interview that I couldn't follow him, that I could go with him. And I think that's one of the reasons why that interview is as strong as it is, I think Keith really felt something about that. I once told Mick in a phone interview we were doing, Mick on the phone is another fantastic experience,
Is that right?
yeah, well, like I remember one time, I mean, this isn't the story I started out to tell, but I remember one time I was supposed to interview him for Rolling Stone, but on the phone, it was about the, what they were going to do for their new tour, or what ideas they had, or something like that. It was almost like a news story. And he's like, like I say, I was supposed to talk to him at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It's like 4. He hasn't really turned up. Then suddenly the phone rings, and I pick up the phone. And he goes, "Oh, hi, Anthony. It's Mick Jagger." I said, "Hey, how are you doing?" He goes, "Yeah, I realized we were supposed to, speak earlier." And I could just like feel him thinking, like, should I apologize? Like I could just feel it. And then he just said, "Well, shall we get started?" No apology. Just, I know I'm late. That's my apology. I recognize it, you
We'll
know?
take it.
Yeah. But like one time on the phone with him also, we were talking about, I was doing an interview with, I wrote liner notes for, one of the reissues of Exile on Main Street, actually.
Uh-huh.
And, I was telling him, we got off on whatever, tangent we were getting off on. I said, well, I said, the Rolling Stones were the first band that I felt required my support. Like people just always were criticizing you. And when I was a kid, like my teachers, I went to Catholic schools, they hated the Rolling Stones. My parents, I had an uncle oh, yeah, that I held a grudge against this guy who was a perfectly nice guy. Yeah, but I held a grudge against him because, like, when I was 13, he told me that the Rolling Stones would never last and would just disappear. And I felt like I said, I felt like you kind of required my support, like, that I could contribute something, by defending you. And he seemed to sort of get a kick out of that because he referred to it later
Oh, okay, cool.
in the conversation. He just said, well, as you were saying earlier, like, how people spoke about us and that, you felt like, that we required your support as a fan. He was making a larger point that I can't remember right now, but I was struck that he would remember and refer to that.
Wow, that is very, very special. Yeah, I'm so glad. By the way, I'm like a kid in a candy store right now to hear all this stuff. And while we're in this little area, I was going to ask about your interactions with them, and specifically, like you alluded to earlier, your interactions with Keith have been plentiful over the years, and they've always been very special. You guys obviously have a very special bond. But one of my favorite interactions is that special you did, I think, for VH1 to One.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and that one is, everyone should check that out. It's on YouTube, and it's Anthony visiting Keith in his Jamaican home, and it's so special because we're seeing Keith in his element. I mean, you guys are out there on his terrace. He's
Yeah.
having a drink in the background. Inside the house, there are his local musician friends
Oh,
singing
all
and
of these Raspers, man. I mean, like,
yeah,
a number of whom were like pretty well-known singers, but like they were all just like, yeah, they were hanging out at Keith's, man. It was a time.
I bet.
Oh, that story is so good. I was down there with VH1. I didn't have a great time. I spent a year at VH1 and I
Oh,
really quit. But
mm.
I mean, the Keith interview was an absolute high point. Okay, we flew down to Jamaica, Ocho Rios, and VH1 being VH1, they set the interview up at like some resort. And Keith and I were sitting on chairs on some, perfectly manicured lawn, and we're
Mhm.
talking, and that was fine. And we go, we finish up, and Keith and I are chatting, and he goes, I goes, how long are you going to be in town? I said, well, we're leaving tomorrow. He goes, well, so I was going to say, you really kind of should come up to my house, because, and then he sort of gestures to the, this, posh, resort. He goes, this is not what my life is like down here. And so I said, well, like, are you inviting us, to film at your house? He said, well, yeah, if you guys can come. Now, I get it, hanging, keeping a film crew in a foreign country for an extra day is, it has a dollar sign on it. I
Right.
realize that. But, it was a VH1 thing that I had to beg, I mean, really, we cannot not do this.
Sure.
I mean, we have to do this.
Absolutely.
And so finally, everybody said, okay, great, we'll do it. And so we go up to Keith's house, man. And honestly, like, first of all, it's like, just overlooking, you know, Ocho Rios Bay. And it was extraordinary. Keith comes out. It was all these Rastas all over the place, man, just hanging out. Because it was when he did that Wingless Angels record. And, a lot of those guys were on it. And so Keith, greets us. He comes out like by himself and, except for his Rasta buddies. I don't really remember like his manager, publicist, anybody being there.
Not even Jane Rose.
I don't think Jane was there. I don't think she
Wow.
was there. Yeah. But Keith takes me aside and he opens up his hand and he's got two spliffs. And he goes, Anthony, he goes, do you still smoke this stuff? And I said, well, yeah, from time to time. And he goes, well, you should smoke one now. And then he said the greatest thing. He goes, it's important down here. Like,
Oh,
like we're not just getting high. It's like, you really want to sort of get what's going on here. This is the way to do it. It preceded all of the conversation, which, the conversation, when I look at it, I have a smile on my face because I remember how high I was. And, the fact that was shown on national, And, I'm like, "God, Keith, man, this is a great house," like, and he took me on a tour of the house, if you remember that, 'cause, over
Yeah.
here is where the thieves break. Over there is where we buried them. Yeah. It was just sensational. It was really, really quite a moment.
I bet it was. And I saw a very small, short glimpse, at least the camera caught it, that Bert, Keith's father, was there. Do you remember seeing him or interacting with him?
I don't remember interacting with
Mm.
him, but, now that you mention it, he was there. Yeah, man, it was a scene. It was really, I mean, obviously that documentary, which I also was on the periphery of, Under the Influence,
Uh-huh.
where
Yes, right.
you at home a little bit, but like this was really the first time the VH1 thing where you saw a kind of unfiltered look at what are these guys and where they're living and how they're living, and it was, it will not disappoint anyone, I think, who takes the time to go and find it.
Well, you bring up a great point there because I think the added layer that makes it extra unique is that you're catching Keith in between tours.
Yeah.
Which is we've all known that he escapes to one of these islands, and he obviously his permanent one of his homes there. So
Yeah.
it's important to see, like, well, what is he like when he's finally off the road? Because he always talks about how he puts down the guitar for a little bit and he just escapes here. And to see him there, it's like, wow, this is him on the weekend, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Oh, yeah. Man, absolutely. Honestly, it was probably, it was a real high point of my career to just have that experience.
Hmm.
Now, there was something else I wanted to say about Keith. Oh, it was actually about Jagger.
Mm.
Remember, I can't even remember what this was for. And this was not that long ago. I was interviewing them all together, for
Wow.
something. What was it?
Well, I don't think I've seen that one. That must have been quite a moment.
It was like I've done a lot of stuff for them that like, well, this is for Japan or we're going to
Ah.
use this for something. And, I never see it again. I mean, I do it. It's fun. I get paid and that's that. But this one thing was, during that, I interviewed, they were all like sitting in a row and then I was interviewing Jagger like solo. And it was sort of amazing. Like these are the kinds of things that you can't, most people, I mean, who aren't like really into the Stones either wouldn't get it or wouldn't care or whatever. But I'm sitting there with Jagger, and it was amazing, like just watching Jagger. Like when people are television people or film crew people, they sort of think like no matter who you are, they think they're kind of doing you a favor, because this is such a big deal.
Right.
Whereas Jagger is literally like clapping his hands, like, okay, like, let's go.
Mm.
Like, I'm not sitting here. Like, I'm not waiting on you.
Right.
You can tell like it was like, I'm ready to go. So we're going, you know? And it was just really, but, inevitably, like there was, the thing, well, we've got to set up the camera, Mick, we've got to do the thing, gotta make it look good, blah, blah, blah. And he would like, okay, but like at that point, he just said to me, he goes, we really, appreciate like all the writing that you've done for us, and about us. And oh God, this was for some girls.
Oh.
Yeah. Cause I wrote liner notes for that, which were 900 million words. I mean, so I remember telling John Landau, I was doing it, he goes, well, what are you up to? And I said, well, I just wrote liner notes for the, this kind of special deluxe edition of Some Girls. And he goes, oh, is that the $1,500 version? Yeah, I don't even know what it costs. They did send me a copy, but I mean, Jagger evidently liked the notes and everything. And I said, well, what really interests me about like some of the new songs, that are on there, like that they kind of spruced up a little bit.
Hmm.
Yeah, there were two in particular that I really liked. Oh God, one was called something blues.
Petrol Blues.
No, it was Keep Up Blues.
Oh, yes, right.
And it was also pretty funny, like the lyrics, I got a new girlfriend. I forget. Oh shit, I'm not gonna remember the lyric. But he, like I said, he spoke that lyric. Like I said, God, your voice sounds really strong on that stuff. And I said, and those lyrics are so funny.
Mhm.
And then he sang, he said, yeah, I got a new girlfriend. And, and then I sang the next part of that line, and, like, we were just sort of laughing. And I told that to a friend of mine, and he goes, "Well, wait a second. So you're saying you sang with Mick Jagger?" He goes, like, "What kind of bucket list would that even be on?" You know? But, like, it was certainly memorable for me.
That's a good point. Yeah, that counts. I say that counts as singing, as a duet, practically. I
Oh,
wonder if the
his girlfriend is an actress. He goes, "I got a new girlfriend. She ain't been in much." Like she was an actress, but like she had a really this, but really like she was mostly like a cocktail waitress, and the lyrics are very, very funny.
I'll have to review that one again because I do love that bonus disc, and I wonder if the other song that caught your attention was one that caught mine. And I might be biased because it had been my personal studio outtake for the longest time. But do you think I really care? The
Oh,
country song.
that's not the one, although I do like that one.
Okay.
Oh god, what is the one? It's the one, I also like. My 2 favorites were Keep Up Blues, and then the other one about, like, he's driving from Texas to California to meet some girl.
Not No Spare Parts.
No Spare Parts. That's
Isn't
exactly the one. Yeah, why do you say that? Why do you say not that?
Well, it's funny because I love the outtake of that so much where he kind of mumbles his way through it. And, and he didn't really have it was a sketch, really, and when he re recorded it, I never really grooved with it because it was a little too, hard edge. But I kind of forgot the content of the song, but I still love the melody and the vibe of it. But I do prefer the outtake a bit more.
I see. Yeah, no, no, no. Yeah, I prefer the actual spruced up version.
Interesting. Oh yeah. Well, to me, did you find it to be controversial? The whole idea of them going back and finishing those songs, because at least for me, there was one positive that came out of it, where it was obvious that him and Don Was had to go back to those tapes, and it seemed like Don Was really tried to push Mick to try to fit his current vocal, the 2011 Mick Jagger, to sound like 1977 Mick Jagger.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that made some kind of lasting or somewhat permanent impression on Mick to go, oh yeah, just take it easy, relax into this, into the
Yeah.
vocal. So I thought that was one of many positives that came out of that whole project.
Yeah, I think also, I mean, Don was once told me about getting faxes from Keith, it was one very interesting note that, Jagger was talking to someone about this new album, and he said that Keith doesn't do Zoom, so they can't work over Zoom, but like he does fax evidently. And he faxed Don Was and just said, about like Exile on Main Street, about, the extra tracks. He goes, don't feel like you have to make it Exile on Main Street. It already is Exile on Main Street, you know?
Brilliant.
But no, I don't find it controversial at all. I just like the idea that they, finish up some stuff as long as they let you know that that's what they're doing.
Right.
No, I mean, I liked it. It's sort of almost like, no one, and the Stones, I mean, I still feel like they require my defense, complaining about them for so long. Like, why don't they record new stuff? But they had done all of that stuff, like they had gone back and like reworked stuff, and they'd done the blues album, and they, done a couple of singles. I mean, how many great records do you need to make? I don't really get that, or the resentment of them condescension, which just drives me crazy about, oh, they're a Rolling Stones cover band. Like, no, they're the Rolling Stones. They wrote those songs. They recorded those songs. They're out there playing those songs. Like, why don't you explain to me what the problem with that is?
Absolute. Oh, that is literally something I wanted to bring up, and I'm so glad you're naturally doing it, because it seems to be that it's something that seems like it's not talked about often, but it's that cynicism that a lot of people seem to be constantly wrestling with. I'm guessing it must have started even back in the 70s and 80s,
Sure.
whenever the Stones would be coming in and out of focus in the public, but I also get very defensive, and I also want to put people to the flame and go, okay, let's do the math here. Tell me, where your problems are, and let's compare. Let's do the math. And it never seems to really work, I find. I thought it's always a misguided.
I honestly feel like there's almost a kind of jealousy involved, like they're old and they're still rock.
Right.
Or they're old. And, Chaka's girlfriend is like 32, like he's, what does he need to prove to you at this point? he's living his life. And I think, you know, look, the Stones have a lot of fans. I mean, they're filling stadiums and will again, seems like, you know, around the world. So, you know, there's plenty of people who like them and are getting a lift off them, you know, but like that condescension about them is so irritating. And I think it comes from a kind of jealousy. Like there's that, you know, don't they have enough or, you
Right.
know, that they still want it. And the same people who criticize them for, you know, still doing it, criticize them for still doing it. You know, like, I mean, like you're saying like, oh, they're not really like, they're just like kind of an oldies act or whatever. Like it's, you know, when you see the Stones live, anybody I've ever encouraged, like, because honestly, over the years, so many people have said to me, well, you know, oh God, you know, they're old, man. I mean, should I go see them? I said, well, why don't you just go?
Hmm.
You know, why don't you just go and let me know what you think? Every single one of those people has come back and told me how incredible the show was.
Hmm.
You know, the Stones play like they mean it, man.
Right.
Oh, and they do. And, you know, you that is such a delight to me, and it's so exciting, and but people resent it. There's a certain kind of coterie of people who resent it. And it's like, "Well, okay, man, you go see whoever you wanna go see." You know, and I'll go see this one. That's fine with me.
Absolutely. And I think that's the missing link that most people fail to realize is that, like you say, when you go see them, it's so clear that the magic, as cliche as it is, but the camaraderie is still there and the interaction is still there. And you can still see that they're still curious and interested in this thing that they're doing. And they're still chasing it after all these years.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's like every night means something, and for different reasons. I think, you know, yet another one of these kind of odd you know, I some thought one time about doing a book of just, like, the stories that don't make it into the stories that you write, you know?
That'd be
Remember
great.
one time I was in Philadelphia and, you know, I teach there. I live in New York City, but I teach it kinda so I'm around Philly a fair amount. And they were gonna play the Tower Theater, like, while they were on one of these massive tours, you know, they were gonna do a show at, you know, whatever, 2,000 seat theater, and so I thought, "Well, fuck, I wanna go to that."
Absolutely. That was
And
2002 Licks tour.
yeah, yeah, and so I went down there and, I was hanging out. Oh, I had to go to the hotel to pick up my tickets, you know, the hotel where they were staying, you know, and I did, and then I was leaving and, you know, fans, you know, there were a few dozen fans, like, you know, not a million people, but enough. Like there was a crowd of people waiting outside for them, you know. And one of them recognized me and like, you know, called to me and whatever, and we were chatting. And I said, well, you know, what are you guys staying out here all day? Or like, what's the deal? And they said, well, you know, no, they're gonna be coming out soon. You know, they're gonna go sound check. How they knew the whole band schedule, I have no idea. But so I thought, well, let me just see this. Let me just see what this is, you know. And, out to the front, like, there were these 2, like, buses, and suddenly, like, there's Keith and, you know, Ronnie and, you know, all the, you know, musicians and, you know, members of the crew, and, you know, they're coming out, and they're all laughing and talking and, you know, piling into these buses. They're waving to people, you know, and whatever. I thought, like, "God, this is interesting, though, like, where's Jagger?" You know? And then I sort of like look out and over on the side, like there's like literally, I'm not joking, like a red carpet and in a velvet robe, like at this side door.
Of course.
And Jagger comes walking out, like looking incredible, like he's wearing sunglasses and looking very cool. You know, gets in the back of some, you know, impossibly swank, like, super fancy car. And that's how he's going to the show. But, you know, even for, you know, I mean, we all know that Mick and Keith, you know, have had difficulties over the years. And there's certainly no secret about that. I think when they got on stage, you know, they both, for different reasons, um, threw in like 100%,
Hmm.
you know? I mean, I think because Keith is a band leader
Hmm.
and it's like, I'm leading this band and we're on stage and we're going to kill. And Jagger is like enough, like I'm never, you know, never wants to embarrass himself, never wants to fall short, you know? And so they're both like hitting it so hard that those shows are just still mind-blowingly good. I mean, you know, I remember from that standpoint of, you know, there was this story, you know, after Jagger had his heart problem,
Hmm.
which was another whole. thing, man. I mean,
Right.
yeah, I was supposed to go to that show. I was going to take my daughter
Oh,
out to
wow.
Miami to see it. We eventually saw them in Washington, but I remember reading, like getting up and seeing like Stones postponed tour, like there was some kind of headline, and just like Jagger's the last one you expect that anything could go wrong with. But like not long after that, as he was recuperating, which was not that long a time.
A few months, really.
No. And but he was doing something with with Melanie, with his girlfriend at Lincoln Center. She had done some, she had choreographed, some ballets, and Jagger was going to do some kind of introduction. Ordinarily, somebody either told me this or I read it somewhere, but like, ordinarily he would have done it on stage, but he did it like over, the public address system and said, "Hey, this is Mick Jagger, here, Melanie Hemrick, did this thing and, what he thought about it and why he was so excited to be there and everything." And somebody asked him, "Well, why didn't you just kind of go out and say that?" He goes, "Because I don't look like Mick Jagger,"
Whoa.
and I
Wow.
thought that was just really fascinating. He still
Jeez.
hadn't felt he was 100% and was not going to show himself. He sat in the audience and all
Yeah.
that, but he was not going to go on a stage like that.
Wow. Yeah, that is quite a thing to say. It really strikes me there when I hear that. I mean, because I have to admit, during that period, that was a bit of an earthquake for us in the Stones world, right? Like you say, we weren't expecting Mick to be the one who needed some time to heal up because of something like this. He was always invincible, So that was the beginning of that. Really is technically a new era. I really find is that whole period was us, or at least me, realizing, holy shit, this is real stuff here.
No, I know. Yeah. Because, Jagger in particular, I mean, he presents himself in such a way that he seems invulnerable, but, he's, a human being just like us. And what I thought was amazing, of course, when they opened that tour in Chicago instead of in Miami, that morning I woke up to see, okay, what was the opening song like? And it seems to me like Jagger made a point of like, like using, for example, the ramp to the B stage, usually was something, he didn't go all the way out to the B stage, but he went out on the ramp on the opening song.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
I thought like, wow, it's almost like he's saying like, I'm back. And it was so funny because, when I took my daughter to Washington, there were some people sitting behind us. I think also Don Covey's family was there.
Oh, wow.
That's staying near us, but some people were sitting behind us, and somebody said, "Yeah," I overheard them talking. He goes, "God, that was an incredible show," but he never said anything
Mm.
about it. He would never
No,
say
of course
anything
not.
about it. So
Oh, and it's exactly what I wanted to note was that I was, and it's typical for me. Whenever the Stones are going on tour, I'm always on YouTube the next day, finding every clip, obviously, trying
yeah,
to relive the show as best I can. And it was my favorite thing to do was to catch Mick apologize at every show for the rescheduling, and I loved it the way he said it was, thank you for rearranging your plans, and we're sorry, but thank you for coming to this show. And at every show, the audience would go nuts, and that was our little way of saying, we know, Mick, and we love you, and don't say anything more. It was a great moment. It was very subtle, though.
very subtle.
Speaking of, Jagger is invincible. I think part of the reason why he sounds extra cheery, like you put it earlier, is because maybe he's realizing, oh, finally, I'm on the other side of a lot of hurdles. The health thing is probably way behind in his rearview mirror now, but the new album and all the work it got to get here. First of all, what were your thoughts? This is like Christmas time for us Stones fans, right? I mean, right now, what were your thoughts when you heard the new song, Angry?
Oh, I liked it.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, it's not "Gimme Shelter," but it's
Right.
perfectly legitimate Stone song, and it made me excited to hear the record. It has a lot of impact. It has a lot of power. You can feel them there. So yeah, no, I was excited by it, and I'm excited to hear the rest of it. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I thought it was a nice reminder of what makes the Stones the Stones. It really just was everyone's best contributions.
Yeah, I think the Stones have gotten in trouble whenever they've gone away from, well, being the Stones, as you said.
Right.
And I think this song, like the second you hear it, it sounds like the Rolling Stones. And like they don't need to. I mean, it's so man, it's like the blues, really.
Hmm.
When you listen to the blues, I mean, if somebody wanted to criticize it, well, why they would, I can't imagine. But like if somebody did, it's like, oh well, it's just, you can recognize it immediately and what is it? But like it's like they've that blues mines a certain territory
Yes.
that because it's so essential is bottomless. It's
Right.
endless. And I think the Stones have gotten to that point too. Like when they're hitting it, like the Stones, anybody who's thinking, oh, gee, why aren't they doing, I don't know, something else? It just seems absurd. So yeah, when I heard Angry, I thought it was cool. And I like the video too.
Yeah, it's a fun video. It's a nice, literally almost a trip down memory lane, seeing all those different animations and AI of the Stones and the billboards. And I think for me, the cherry on top for the song is that it's Keith playing bass on that, which is super rare. I mean, I think by my calculations, the last single that had Keith on bass could have been like Jumpin' Jack Flash.
Wow.
Yeah. It's when I saw the credit there that Keith was on bass, and I focused on the bass, and oh my God, this for me is kind of what's not saves the song, but it's really my main focus whenever I listen to it. And it's such a playful, vibrant part, and I'm so glad that his presence is on there in that kind of way, because it is a little bit of more of a Mick focus, a little bit the song, but
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess Mick wrote it.
yeah.
I mean, or, came up with the original version of it, that they then, all lent their elements to. But yeah, no, it was Mick's tune originally.
Yeah, and he sounds fantastic on it. Talk about invincible. I mean, that's the other cherry on top for me, is that he comes across so well, and everyone's just pumping away. And it's funny because I heard the song first, and then the ramp up of the album was starting that week and the following week, and I began to notice something very interesting in their marketing, in the ads they were putting out. Underneath the Hackney Diamonds name, they had a very provocative byline that said, Hackney Diamonds, new album, new music, new era. So I was very struck by that phrasing, new era. I thought that was extremely bold and in a way unprecedented. I don't remember the Stones ever planting a flag on something like that before. And so it got me thinking about, the present and them claiming this new era. And I couldn't help but go back to the past and think of all their history is made up of eras in a way,
Yeah.
and what they may envision the next era to be in the future. So, out of curiosity, did that register with you? Did you have any reaction when you saw that phrase, new era, new Stones
Well,
era?
I certainly had the reaction when, I've, in interviews, Jagger has talked about, well, we've got 60% of another record done. Like this is not going to be the last Stones album, and for somebody who is 80 years old to say that, I mean, it's just extraordinary. So I think, and that they're feeling energized, in a funny way. I think they're proud of having finished the record,
Mm.
like, when Mick has talked about it, they've gone into the studio and they've tried to do things. I mean, God, I did liner notes for, I think, Keith's last solo record, and I was in the studio with him, and he said, well, Mick was in the other day, do you want to hear some stuff that we were doing?
Whoa.
Well, yeah. And so he took me into this other room, and Tom was there,
Wow.
and they played. I was there for about 20 minutes or so, and he played like, it was like Don was playing, almost like a series of riffs that Keith had given to Mick. So like they were these riffs with Mick over the top, like trying to come up with like a melody line,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and just like singing, nonsense lyrics or, whatever would come to his mind. It was about as raw, certainly, as any Stone stuff I've ever heard. I remember thinking, and in fact, I said, Jane Rose came in and said, Anthony, it's time to go.
Oh, darn. Time's up.
Yeah, and so like, I just said, I looked at, Keith and Don, and I just said, well, I think you guys have something. You should continue this,
Yeah.
I was like playing around with them, but I remember thinking like, fuck, stuff sounds really good.
Oh, man.
nobody was like walking through anything. And, it was raw and they weren't songs. They were kind of ideas for songs. And
Right.
especially Keith was saying, well, let's keep that one, like, not that one, like when he felt like either he had gotten something or Mick had gotten something. And it was fascinating to be given that little glimpse of how they were. And I guess, over the years they were doing stuff at various points, but this time they determined to finish up, to get a record done. And I think they're proud. I think, they obviously like it. And I think they're happy that they got it done. And, that they're looking forward to going out and playing some of those songs.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And, I hope that song that you heard was one of the two cuts that I assume Charlie was on that track that you heard back then. And hoping that those are one of the two Charlie tracks that are going to be on the album, because the rest of it was going to be Steve Jordan
Yeah.
tracks, which was one of the things that shocked me, actually, coming into this idea of the new album. I thought it was going to be primarily a Charlie Watts with some help of Steve Jordan, but it's the complete opposite. So I think that had a lot to do with this idea of a new era. They must see this as, let's just start fresh in many ways, not just
Well, I
this
think,
album.
I have to say, I saw them play. I mean, I saw them with Steve.
Okay, cool. I was going to ask.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I thought they sounded phenomenal.
Absolutely.
And they were playing, there was no sense of, I mean, look, they were as respectable as they could possibly be. But, I think once they made the decision, like, we are going to continue, and they had somebody great to play with, they were just tearing it up. So I'm not surprised at all by that. I think, they wanted to represent Charlie on it. And, there's a kind of, the idea that they're doing a little bit of Rolling Stone blues at the end of it, acoustic version of that. And, that they got Bill to play on it a little bit. And, not to mention, Paul McCartney and whatever, I mean, I think that there's, an acknowledgement of their past, but I think that they are ready for a new era.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, the pragmatist in me, and, like, no band is more pragmatic than the Rolling Stones,
Right.
thinks, how much of a new era can this really be? I mean, it pains me to think that,
I know.
but, look, I think about this kind of thing myself. I'm 72. I think about, my own work and my own life. And I mean, I like their commitment. I like their conviction, but you're aware of what can go wrong. Just in the last year, we, have lost so many people.
Mm-hmm.
And, so you're kind of hoping, but I think the conviction and the belief and the force and the power, they still feel that they're the Rolling Stones, and they still feel that they have something to live up to. And I think that constitutes, a new era. They're never going to say this is the last thing. That's never going to happen.
Right.
It will happen of its own course, but not because somebody makes a decision about it. I think that, this is an element of them that often is overlooked, that they're a band and they're musicians and they're out there playing, and they want to be. And, they're in a good space right now, seemingly. All indications are that it's all systems go for the Stones right now. It's exciting.
Absolutely. And, what I come away with the new era idea, it's not surprising for me either, because it's almost like they're daring the universe at this point.
Yeah.
They're basically giving the universe, and by the way, this as well, more than anyone, that the universe has given the Stones plenty of opportunities to stop, and the Stones have said, oh yeah, that's what you think. Bam, new era. That's what we say to that, and I think that's part of their DNA, which is, that was for me, what I got out of those shows in 2021 with Steve Jordan, is that, wow, they're dealing with this loss, but they're also reacting to it in the most, aggressive way you can when something like this hits you, and I think that goes a long way for the Stones. And I think
They're playing their asses off.
oh yeah,
We're just incredible.
oh yeah, absolutely. I remember seeing one video early in the 2021 run where, because songs like Jumpin' Jack Flash sounded like fucking crazy. It was nuts. And I saw Keith look back in the direction of Steve Jordan going, holy shit, this guy's kicking my ass in a good way, and you could tell that it just reverberated across the whole band. And it was amazing to watch in person.
Without a doubt.
Well, I'm so glad to hear those thoughts. As we begin to wind down, can I ask you a couple random questions and we can begin to sign off?
Yeah.
I appreciate it. There was another news piece a couple months ago that came out. Billboard magazine named Mick Jagger #1 on the list of 50 greatest rock singers. And, I'm sure all Stones fans were like, well, duh,
Yes.
But it got me to think, and I was so proud of Mick, not that he needs my praise, but I was proud of that spot. And it got me wondering, what does Mick Jagger do differently that no one else seems to do as well? Have you that ever crossed your mind?
Because I think, I think it's about performance, that was the name of that movie. And Mick, that's the one thing when you're around him, it's like I think he thinks of himself as a performer. That line that he said that night at Lincoln Center, I don't look like Mick Jagger. I think that's how he sees himself. It's like a character that he is. And so there's the singing, and he's a great singer. We know that. And he's really taken care of his voice. In many ways, his voice is stronger now.
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And his, phrasing, is great. But I think that what he does is I think he sees himself as like a character in his songs. I think, he would never, I don't think, agree to that. I'd be almost a little bit shy about mentioning that to him. He would see it as pretentious or something, but I think it's true. I think he does see himself as somebody who enacts these songs.
Right.
And I think that's why he's the greatest, because, it's like the way you see yourself in some way inside yourself, when you're singing in the shower or, you're private or you're dancing in the living room. That's what Mick does all the time.
Fantastic. I love that. That is absolutely true. It's uninhibited. It's just completely putting the music through his body. And it's fascinating to watch. And if it's all happening right, the audience should be participating in that same way too.
Oh, and he thinks that. I remember talking to him one time about, we were talking about Little Richard. And he said, when I would watch Little Richard, the audience, if he felt the audience wasn't into it, he would go and get them.
Oh man.
He would go and get them, there wasn't any laying back. And Jagger took that lesson, he goes after it. He doesn't pander, which I love.
Yeah.
It's not like he, there are people who are so enamored of the audience that, it's almost like a little embarrassing or something. He's not, but he wants you in there. And the way he knows to get you in there is for him to be 100% in there. And that's what people respond to, and it's, he's still probably the single greatest performer. That's what I said to my daughter after I took her to see. She was, let's see when this would have been 3 or 4 years ago, I guess. So she was, 13, 14. I said, you just saw one of the greatest performers who's ever lived.
Yeah, it's electricity completely when you're around him. A couple crossfire questions, if I may. Some nerdy Stones fans questions that I would love to ask you.
Yeah.
The Stones have put out so many expanded box sets over the years. You've talked about, you wrote for Some Girls in Exile, and they put out Goat's Head Soup Deluxe Editions.
Yeah.
What are some albums that you're hoping to see an expanded version one day?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I don't know that we're ever going to see expanded versions of all those early records, because of the whole Alan Klein situation. They don't own them.
Too bad.
Oh God. I wrote liner notes for that early Stones collection called Singles. Alan Klein hired me to do that.
Wow.
And nobody had ever done this before. He called me personally, I met him any number of times, and went to his office, which was gigantic. And when I turned it in, back in those days, you weren't emailing your stories in. I went with, whatever it is, 10 pages of whatever I wrote. And he sat there and read it. And he goes, wow, this is really good. And he sat there, opened a ledger and wrote out a check in it. I mean, getting paid by record companies is an incredible pain in the ass.
Is that right?
Ever done that? He just opened up a ledger right in front of me, hand wrote a check and handed it to me.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
The other thing we were talking about, I said, well, it was around the time of the whole box set thing was going on. Everybody was really excited. I'd won a Grammy for the Eric Clapton box
Hmm.
set, Crossroads, which I think was why Alan called me in the first place. But he goes, I said, do you think like the Stones will ever do a box set like that? He goes, well, they contacted me and they wanted to, license a bunch of my stuff. And I love the way he said it, my stuff. Like,
Right.
he goes, and I said, well, okay, I get what you're trying to do, but why don't you license what you have to me and then I'll put out the box set?
Hmm.
And, that never happened, understandably. Jagger would never do that in 10 million years.
Right.
But he goes, after he said that, he goes, I mean, look, I've got, what do I have? I've got, Satisfaction, got Jumpin' Jack Flash, I've got, the last time.
Hmm.
He goes, what have they got? And then he just looks at me and he just pauses for a beat and then goes, Angie is a really good song.
Oh, thanks.
So yeah, I don't know that we're going to see. I don't know. I mean, maybe now. I mean, Alan is long dead, and maybe they'll figure out a way to do it. But I don't know that they're ever going to go back to all that stuff. Unfortunately, I mean, it would be wonderful to. I mean, look, those early Stones records.
Yeah.
They're. I mean, they're all essential. Every single one of them is
Yeah.
essential. So to say I'd prefer this one over that one, I mean, any one of them. An extended version of the Rolling Stones now. Thank you. Yeah.
I think I'd go in the opposite direction. I think there's room for a reevaluation and maybe a remix to Dirty Work.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There would be some interesting stuff since, it seemed like they were all rarely in the studio together. But
Yeah. I wouldn't mind a twofer with Undercover as well. One other crossfire question here. Every Stones fan has a short list of songs that they're always hoping and praying to hear the Stones play live for the first time, or maybe just not in a long time. Do you have any songs that you're kind of always hoping to check out to see in the set list? Oh, there it is. Finally, it's here.
I have to say, I have very conventional tastes in many ways. People always, are assuming, that, I'm somebody who's like listening to, rarities all the time or whatever. But
Right.
in fact, I mean, I sort of like these greatest hit sets.
Sure. Oh, do you?
And so mostly they do all the songs that I want them to do. I'm trying to think if there's anything that I've ever felt, like I would be so disappointed to go see them and not hear them do Satisfaction,
Sure.
or Jumpin' Jack Flash, God, which they kill
Yeah.
live. They do phenomenal versions of Give Me Shelter every
Uh-huh.
time. And that's another thing I don't understand about the people who complain about all that. It's like, if you go see Hamlet, do you think, oh man, I've seen Hamlet? Like, like it's like, well, maybe it's worth seeing again. Maybe there's something you can get from it. And I can't say that I have ever, I mean, look, I've seen Stones shows that, were not up to their standard, let's say that. But when they're untouchable when they're as good as they can be, and which they often are. And any song that they play, in those, in those contexts move me. I mean, I wouldn't mind them hearing them do a song like Let It Loose,
Yeah.
a really standard blues thing that goes pretty deep. But, I rarely walk out thinking, oh God, why didn't they do such and such, because, when you see them do whatever the songs are that they do, they could do an entire set of other songs that are equally good, and, I think for me, a lot of it is about performance, that idea that I was talking about with Jagger, and as long as they're feeling it, like I'm feeling it.
So in closing, then, are the Rolling Stones still the world's greatest rock and roll band?
Well, to me, they are for sure. I mean, I get it, on any particular day. I've certainly seen other bands do great, great shows, but they're still my favorite band. When I was a kid, look, you have to kind of exclude the Beatles in a funny way because, the Beatles sort of kind of created the world that I live in a way. And, look, they were very important for the Rolling Stones too. But, the Stones, became my band from the very start. So, do I think they're the greatest rock and roll band in the world? Yeah. I think on any given night, when you see them, I mean, there's certainly nobody else. I'm never there thinking like, gee, I really wish I was seeing so and so tonight. The Stones, between the quality of those songs and the intensity of their performance, it's hard to beat that.
I'm with you. Amen. Anthony, this was a huge thrill, and I can't thank you enough for taking the time. I mentioned earlier the new Steve Miller box set came out this week, J50, The Evolution of the Joker. Would you like to speak a little bit about it for people looking to get into that this week?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how many people are living and dying with the Joker as an album. It was a very important album for Steve. Essentially revitalized his career. It was his first big hit, the song itself. But they went through, Steve actually and his wife, Janice, went through and pulled together like 2 discs of incredible stuff. So I mean, I don't have a lot of pictures, I have to say, even as I was talking about, those Stones outtakes from some girls that I really love. But, these songs are really terrific. I like outtakes that you can listen to like you're listening to an album. I'm not the idea that it's rare or like, gee, I've never heard this. Like, okay, so what? Like I feel like, is it good? I mean, am I feeling it? And anybody who's interested in Steve Miller or that era or the stuff he was doing around that time would be very well rewarded. I mean, in a way, the album is at the center. The Joker album is at the center of this thing, but there is a very rich context to it that I think will very much impress anybody who takes the time to listen to it.
I happened to take a glance at the track list. And I thought it looked super unique because I saw that interspersed with the amazing rare tracks, there was commentary by Steve.
Yes.
And I thought that's so unique, and you don't see that. And that's such a welcome idea in these kind of deluxe edition ideas,
And Steve wrote liner notes for it, I mean, along with mine. And he really wrote them. Like I didn't ghostwrite them where nobody else did. He wrote a long essay and it's very good. So, he speaks very much in his own voice about the experience and about that era and about that time. And again, it's extremely well done. The package is beautiful and I'm very proud of it. I've done liner notes and, I mean, look, it's always a blast. They're always fun to write. But this set came out extremely well, and I think people really dig it.
Anthony DeCurtis, thank you so very much for your time.
It was a tremendous amount of fun. Thank you so much for being there.
Once again, my sincere thanks to Anthony DeCurtis. For more information on Anthony, he can be found online, on Facebook, and on X at @DeCurtis, plus also on Instagram at anthony.decurtis. The links are all in the description below. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Hangfire, a Rolling Stones podcast.